All right, so happy Mother's Day. Happy Mother's Day to all the mothers here. We're going to first look at the first scripture. We're going to look at one of the examples that Jesus kind of talks about with mother's love. So this is in Luke 13, 31 through 34. And so when Jesus is giving this message here, he's talking to the group that was always rejecting Israel, right? The people, the prophets at the time, the Pharisees, they didn't want to listen to Jesus and his warnings. They didn't want to listen to the true love that he was kind of offering. So it says, at that very hour, some Pharisees came and said to him, "Get away from here, for Herod wants to kill you." And he said to them, "Go and tell that fox, behold, I cast out demons and perform cures today and tomorrow, and the third day I finish my course. Nevertheless, I must go on my way today and tomorrow and the day following, for it cannot be that a prophet should perish away from Jerusalem. O Jerusalem, Jerusalem, the city that kills the prophets and stones those who are sent to it. How often would I have gathered your children together as a hen gathers her brood under her wings, and you were not willing." So we see a lot of examples where he talks about he's the shepherd, protects the sheep from the wolves, right? And so this time he's going to use the example of how a mother hen protects her babies, right? And so he uses the illustration of a fox, right? If you ever had a chicken coop, you understand that all the chickens are in one thing, right? And then you'll get foxes and stuff that try to attack them. So he's using that example, but he's trying to show this motherly love at the same time, right? Shepherd lays down his life. He used that example, but he's also talking about how mothers do the same thing, right? In this example, he's comparing the king to the fox, right? If you know Herod, he's the guy that killed John the Baptist, right? We understand what kind of power he has. And so he's trying to tell Jesus to stop doing what he's doing. And obviously he's saying, I'm going to keep doing that, right? He's like, I'm going to do the work of God. I have no problem. But he's kind of then telling everybody, obviously they don't even want to be protected, right? Like Israel's pushing them away. The prophets are pushing them away, the Pharisees. And so he's like, I wish I could gather you like a mother does to protect you from what's coming, right? And so, but this is where he said, like, Jesus was all about laying down his life, right? And so he's kind of showing them mothers do the same thing, right? Mothers, to me, have one of the greatest abilities to show this Christ-like love, right? They're the ones that are like, I'm willing to sacrifice my body, my health, all kinds of things, right? They always put their kids first, always trying to take care of them. And so that's where we see, like, that is a great way to show us Christ-like love, right? And so that's what I always see a mother's love as. I thought about my mother for this, right? My mom is definitely like this. She's definitely a protector, very, very compassionate, always trying to keep us from harm. If you know my mom, if you know me, you probably realize my mom is probably a pretty crazy lady, right? If she brought this craziness into the world, she has a craziness of her own. So when I was in high school, I used to always help my mom close our shop, right? My parents owned a jewelry store. When I was a freshman, my dad started a new store in Watsonville, and my mom had the store in San Jose. So my dad wasn't able to kind of help her close, right? And so he used to tell me, like, you always have to be there to close the shop. After school or after sports practice, you got to get to the shop to help your mom, right? And so while he was like, anytime, people could come rob us, things like that. So at our store, we had guns, right? We had a gun in our money drawer. We had a gun in our safe. Our dad taught us how to use it. When I was a senior, there was a robbery right above us, right? So they tied up this jewelry store up above us, tied them up, robbed them, did all kinds of stuff, and just took off, right? So my dad was like, be very aware, right? Like, times are getting hard. People are hitting the jewelry stores. He's like, make sure you're there for your mom. So I'm like, all right, got it, Pops. He's like, don't let nothing happen to my wife, right? Don't let it happen to my one. And I'm like, got it, Dad. I got it. I'll do whatever it takes to protect her. So 2 weeks later, after that robbery, I'm there at the store, right? And so we lock up everything. And all of a sudden, this construction worker shows up after 9 o'clock, right? And so he's like, I need to get in. I need to check something in the building. We never saw him before. It was kind of a sketchy situation. We're like, who is this guy? Why is he here? Especially at this time of night, right? And so he's like, I'll call the manager, let me in, right? He's like, you guys got to let me in. And so we're like, okay. So I was like, don't worry, Mom. I'll go open the door. I'll go make sure that he's okay, right? Nothing happens. Nothing's out there. Nobody's going to come in and rob us. My mom, on the other hand, was like, no, right? Like, it's my job to protect you. I'm going to go check the door. I'm going to go make sure, everything's okay. And I'm like, no, right? Like, Dad said, I got to do this, right? And if my mom is probably the most stubborn lady out there. And she's just like, no, my son's not going to protect me. That's my job, right? And so I'm like, no, so now I have to obey my parents, right? But both of them are not saying the same thing. And so I'm kind of like, Dad, this is a no-win situation, right? Like, if something happens, my dad's gonna be mad, and if I try to stop my mom, that ain't gonna work. And at the same time, my dad would be mad if I stopped my mom, right? And so I was kind of like, what am I supposed to do? And so my mom's like, this is my job, right? So she grabs the gun and she goes to check the door. And so as she's there, I'm sitting there, I'm mad. I'm like, man, she's not letting me do what I'm supposed to do, right? So I have the other gun where I'm at, so just in case something happens. And so she goes, talks to the guy, right? Luckily, nothing happened. We let the guy in, and so there was nobody else there. So when she came back to our store, I was like, let me see the gun, Mom. And so when I take her gun, I'll pop it open, right? And I showed her, there's no bullet in the gun. And so I was like, you didn't actually check to see if there was a bullet. So if you pulled this gun on that guy, it would have misfired, right? If he tried to grab you, he tried to hurt you, you would have been in trouble. And he would have had a gun now to use against me as well, right? And so I told her, I was like, you don't know how to do it. You're not prepared for this. And I was like, that's why I'm here, right? This is my job. I would have checked. I would have known. That's why I knew to check it right now to make sure it was right. And so she was like, oh man. I was like, don't. And so she was like, I'm trying to protect you, son, right? And I was kind of like, well, you can't protect me by doing that. Right? I was like, we each have our roles. We each have our job. And I was like, this is why my dad sent me here, because he knows I'm ready for this, right? I already joined the Army. I've trained with them all the time, right? And I've been working that gun for many years, right, for my dad. And so I was like, Mom, I was like, I get it. You want to protect me, but that's not the best way, right? I was like, you got to let me do what I do. And so as she said that, right, she was like, yeah, that's my bad, right? So it was hard to stay mad at my mom in that episode because I knew why she did it, right? She was like, I don't want my son to be in danger. And so she's like, I should be the one that goes out there. And so in that moment, right, I was kind of laughing where I was like, my father, his level of love was like, I'll give up my son to protect my wife, right? Like, that's my one, right? Like, we're together forever. I was like, my mom's view was opposite. She was like, I'm not going to let my son get hurt, right? So she was the one like, I'm going to sacrifice. I'll put myself in danger. And so I was always kind of laughing. I was like, I see the difference in the father and mother love. And I'm not saying every father's like that, but that's what I was like. To me, that's how my dad was. Like, I was like, I don't care if you guys survive. I want my wife, right? Like, my wife, I'm going to be with her forever. And so it's kind of sweet, kind of nice, but at the same time, if you're his kid, you're like, dang, my dad was willing to give me up, right? but that's what I said, like, he loved his wife that much, right? And so to me, that's what I saw. Like, my mom, even though she knew I was very good at fighting, all that stuff, right, all that preparation, in her mind, it didn't matter. Like, I was her son. I needed to be protected, right? And so that's what we see, like, that sacrificial type of love and that protecting type of love where it's like, it don't matter the danger, she'll do whatever it takes to protect. Does that make sense? And so as I understood what kind of love she was offering, how she was trying to show me that Christ-like love, I understood it from seeing the scriptures as well of how this motherly love works, right? So one of the stories that we're going to look at is Naomi. Does anybody know who Naomi is? Go ahead, shout it out. Who's Naomi? Shout it out, shout it out. This is a church we just get all Ruth's mother-in-law. All right. We know the book of Ruth. We understand that that's a very good sacrificial love. But the book could just as easily be called Naomi, because Naomi is actually one of the central characters as well that actually impacts Ruth to make her want to do sacrificial love. And so this is where it was kind of like Ruth is just there because the book's named after her because she has a specific place in Christ's history. That's why she's there. But the story really is about Naomi. Right? It's about both of them in a sense. But it's important to understand who Naomi was, what she did, and how it impacted Ruth, and why she now is in Christ's lineage. So in the handout, I have it there. This is Ruth 1:8 through 14, right? Just the background. Naomi, she had two sons. They both get married off to two women that are not part of Israel. They get married to two women that are part of the Moabite. They're Moabites, right? They're from the Moab tribe that are neighbors to Israel. So when they get married, after about 10 years, both sons die. And so traditionally, if one son died, right, the wife of that son would marry the other's husband. Does that make sense? And then they would have a child. They would be able to pass down everything down to that family through that extra child, right? So it was all about like keeping in the family, protecting each other, looking out for each other. So because both sons died, there was nobody to help either wife. Does that make sense? So now both wives are in vulnerable positions, and also the mother is in a vulnerable position, right? Because there's nobody to take care of her. So in this moment, Naomi's going to tell them, go off. Don't stay with me, right? So it says here, but Naomi said to her two daughters-in-law, go, return each of you to her mother's house. May the Lord deal kindly with you as you have dealt with the dead and with me. The Lord grant that you may find rest, each of you in the house of her husband. Then she kissed them, and they lifted up their voices and wept. And they said to her, no, we will return with you to your people. But Naomi said, turn back, my daughters. Why will you go with me? Have I yet sons in my womb, that they may become your husbands? Turn back, my daughters, go your way, for I am too old to have a husband. If I should say I have hope, even if I should have a husband this night, and should bear sons, would you therefore wait until they were grown? Would you therefore refrain from marrying? No, my daughters, for it is exceedingly bitter to me for your sake that the hand of the Lord has gone out against me. Then they lifted up their voices and wept again. And Orpah kissed her mother-in-law, but Ruth clung to her. Right? So this is where we said, like, they're always supposed to stay within the family. So even if those two sons died, Naomi would have to have another kid for them to be able to marry them. Right? And so this is where we see Naomi. Number one, she wants them to be blessed, go somewhere else. But she wouldn't want them to wait another 18, 20 years just for her to have a son, so that one of them could get married. Does that make sense? She's like, why make you guys wait that long and be that sad, be that lonely? Does that make sense? Like, she's kind of like, she's looking out for them in every single way, where it's like, you should go back to your people. That way you have a chance to get married now at your age. Don't worry about me. Don't let the bitterness of my life impact your life, right? Save yourself. So this is where we see that sacrificial, compassionate love. Naomi on her own, she's going to be in a lot of trouble, right? But that's what she says. Like, I would rather be in the trouble by myself than to drag you guys with me, right? Or to add that to your guys' lives. You already have a tough life now because your husband's died. Here's a new chance at freedom. Go. Here's a new chance at joy. Go without me. Because if you take me with you, it's not going to be good. Does that make sense? So that's what we see. Naomi is establishing this sacrificial love. And so one of the daughter-in-laws obviously says, okay, thank you. And she leaves. That's why she kissed her. But Ruth, after seeing this, Ruth wants to stay with her. Does that make sense? So now everything we know about Ruth, where Ruth was helping the mother, taking care of her, all these things, right? That's where we see Ruth kind of stand out. But it didn't just randomly happen. That makes sense? Ruth didn't just come out on the scene and say, hey, I'm this person. I know what it's like to do a sacrificial love. All right, we're speculating because I don't know what Ruth was like before. But we see her, this is why it's written like this. Her sacrificial love comes in response to the sacrificial love offered to her. Does that make sense? She is responding, saying, man, this mother-in-law wants to look out for me and is willing to lay her life down so I can have life. Does that make sense? And that's where we see, like, this is where it's a great story that shows us what Christ did, why his sacrificial love is so important, but even why so many people responded with sacrificial love in response to Christ. Does that make sense? After seeing him lay down his life, that's why all his people wanted to do the same thing, right? All his disciples, all the apostles, all those people were like, he laid it down, I want to. And that's where we see, like, the mothers, how they show this same sacrificial love, how it changed Ruth and made her want to do the same. Does that make sense? And that's why I said their life stories, the way they're looking out for each other, it was based upon that sacrificial love of the mother first, right? She wanted her to be protected. And so hopefully, as we understand, why everybody has their roles, what mothers really bring, they're really trying to show us that sacrificial love, really trying to show us that Christ-like love that is willing to lay down their lives so that their kids can have everything. And so as we talk about this, as we're talking about offering this sacrificial love, it's important to understand God gives us more mothers, right? This is where it's kind of cool, where number one, obviously we're a family of faith. We talk about that all the time. We have brothers and sisters in Christ. But there's also these mentionings where we also get the family, right? Ruth is a great example of this. Ruth is not Naomi's daughter. She's not her daughter by blood. But how does she take care of her? How does she treat her? Does that make sense? She basically adopts her and says, you'll be my daughter. I'm going to take you to Israel. This adoption is important to understand because Ruth has no standing in God's family. She is a Moabite. That's why that detail is there. She cannot marry Israelites. She cannot go into the promised land and necessarily just marry anybody. Right? And so when she gets adopted by Naomi, this is where we see her now living in Israel. She's eligible for something that they call the Kinsmen Redeemer, right? Somebody that's able to marry and take care of her. And there's a certain portrayal of that's who Christ is. He's called the Kinsman Redeemer as well. But this is where it's kind of setting up. Because she's adopted in the family, she can now be redeemed by her kinsman, Boaz. Right? And so that's what we see. But it's all about this, that Naomi wasn't her mother at first, but through God's leading in the way their life worked, Ruth is now the real daughter of Naomi. Does that make sense? That's where we see this kind of like, now she's taking her under, now she's protecting her, now she's looking out for her. And so this is where it's important to understand, right? As a family of Christ, we have these different roles. God will provide a lot of mothers. Because there's like Luke 28, right? They ask him like, who's your mother and brother are waiting outside. And he says, my brothers are those who hear the word of God and do it. Timothy says, do not rebuke an older man, but encourage him as you would your father, younger men as brothers, older women as mothers, younger women as sisters in all purity. Right? If we see a lot of this where it's like, they're really your family. But it's also important to understand why God gives us more mothers. One of the stories that I think about is my start in ministry, right? Because even for Mother's Day, it's kind of weird for women that don't have kids, right? What was God's plan, or how was God bringing this out as well? When I first started in ministry, there was a woman. My first ministry was doing an after-school program at an elementary school. It's called Kids Club, right? You taught the Bible, you taught sports, and you did snacks with them after school on the campus, right? And so the lady that started this program, she did it for 8 years before I got there, right? She would do this program for 10 years. She worked with like hundreds of kids every year, right? It was a big program. She saw God doing this. She brought a lot of volunteers, right? So she had a chance to pour into all these kids. So when I first met her, we had all these conversations, right? Because the first day that I got out of the Army, I got back on a Thursday. I was volunteering on a Friday that day. The very next day, they needed some volunteers. I was able to connect with her and talk with her. And so she got me plugged in. Right. So as I saw this program, it was pretty cool, right? I didn't even know you could teach kids at public school, like the faith, right? And so I was like, it was pretty impressive what they were doing. She was like cooking all kinds of homemade popcorn, like the real deal one, not microwave. Like she did it in oil. Like she did it for 100 kids every single week, right? And the kids loved it. Like this lady just put all kinds of love and care into this program. And that's why there were so many kids there. And so as I talked to her, and I met her, I got to know her. Her husband was a very strong Christian as well. Two very great people. And so as I talked to her, she was like, they were mid-50s. And she was like, well, I never had any kids, right? God never blessed me in that way, or God never called me to have kids. And so she was saying like, it's hard to get volunteers for this program, right? Like, they were kind of starting to run out to the bare minimum. And so she was saying like, God, I don't know why God didn't create that opportunity, but I just did this. I was faithful here, right? And so as I was talking to her, I was understanding something. I was like, yeah, it's like, it's hard to find a lot of volunteers in churches, right? And part of it, and what I told her was like, because everybody has their own kids, for the most part, they're always taking their kids to everything, right? All the after-school programs, all the studying, all these things. And so I was like, it's hard for them to say, hey, I'm going to spend all this time aside to help a huge amount of kids, right? And so I told her, I was like, in many ways, the way I see God's plan for your life, he didn't want you to be a mom. He wanted you to be a super mom, right? You basically helped raise 500 kids. And because in the area she worked in a low-income community where a lot of the kids, most of them were single parents, right? Most of them, they didn't have a lot of influences. They were either missing their mom or dad. And so she was able to bring in all those people that could kind of minister to these kids, right? Fill that role, be father figures or mother figures. I was trying to think of a better way to say mother figure. It sounds kind of weird, right? I know what father figure is. What do you call a mother figure? Is that how you say it? All right. All right, so, but that's what we said, right? Like this lady she had her calling by God was to keep pouring all this love, keep developing all these kids. Because even for myself, right? Like she helped me get started, and I've always viewed her as that spiritual mother, right? Because for the most part, like I said, I was there on day one with her, but it was the only reason why I got an opportunity was because they were so short of leaders. Does that make sense? They were short. They weren't going to be able to host the minimum kids. I had all the medical shots from my military background, and I had a top secret clearance. So I could pass the background check, right? It takes time to get a background check. So most people, it would take time to fill that need. I already came with one in hand. So she was like, I can actually use you tomorrow, right? And so she got me plugged in. She got me started in ministry. And I was very thankful for that because in reality, when I first came, I don't know who was going to hire me, right? I was pretty crazy, rough around the edges, right? And it was like, who would trust me with kids, right? I'm still shocked that anybody trusts me with kids. Right, because there are stories from that ministry where like I almost broke a kid's rib, all kinds of crazy stuff. But that's why I said like this lady nurtured me from the very beginning, right? Grew me, helped me understand when I was completely brand new to really serving, right? I never had the opportunity. I was fresh out of war. I was fresh out of everything, and this lady came alongside me, guided me, protected me. Does that make sense? And really just shared everything, all her experiences, the 10 years of just how to lead, how to be patient, how to raise all these kids with the little time that we get. Does that make sense? Like she really showed me that. And that's why I said like, because she didn't have those kids, she was able to do that. Does that make sense? And that's what we said, like God's ability in her life, that's what he gave her. And he gave her a chance to do so much more. And she was very faithful in it. Does that make sense? She did that sacrificial love. She did all that type of stuff to protect everybody. Right. And so that's where I said like the way this family works, the way God works, he continues to add all these people, right? He continues to add So many mothers and mothers, because even, that's what we said, you see Ruth in there as well. But when you think about for Christianity, why this is important, there's a lot of places in this world where if you become a Christian, your family disowns you. Right? If you work with a lot of Muslim nations, that's what happens. Right? Even in Fremont, you see a lot of people from Afghanistan, Pakistan, places like that. When they convert, their whole community cuts them off. Their whole support network cuts them off. Does that make sense? They're like, you've betrayed us. You betrayed what we believe in. You're not one of us no more. And so they're out here alone. And that's where usually the church kind of comes along and says, hey, we're family. We got you. We'll protect you. If you need help moving, right? You need babysitting. All kinds of stuff. You now see all these people come into that role. I've met a lot of women from India, right? When they get baptized, they talk about that. They're like, man, once I've done this public act, my family is very upset. And they do not want to deal with me. And that's where they're kind of like, I'm alone now. And they're like, I know Christ is more important. That's why I'm making this choice, but it sucks to be alone. And that's where all the women, all the people that came along, they're like, you ain't alone. We got you. Does that make sense? That's what we said, like the family that God brings, and because he's continuing to try to pour this love in. And so hopefully wherever you're at, you understand this, that this is a call that God has put on all of us, right? That's why you see Timothy, where it's like, as older men, you're supposed to be fathers. As younger men, you're supposed to be younger brothers, right? All these type of things. The family is supposed to come fill all those roles. And so I'll end this with, a mother's work is never done. And so as God has kind of said, I'm pouring out this love, I'm showing you what it is. This is a way to see what Christ's love is like. It's important to understand that mother's work is never done. And so the reason why I say this is because to me, mothers have a great chance to really develop faith, right? That's what we said. A sacrificial love, being able to look out for others first, that is something that all of us need to grow in as Christians. And so if mothers have that role and that significance, then they really have to keep growing that to be able to grow the faith to do that as well. Does that make sense? And so that's why I said it's never done. And I'll use my own mom as an example, right? Because this is where I use that same story, right? My mom is crazy. She always wants to protect me. When I wanted to join the Army, my mom objected. When I was 17, I joined when I was 17 at the end of my junior year. I have to get both parents' permission to join when you're underage. That makes sense? The Army does not let one parent sign off. They make both your parents sign that form. The reason why is because it's very likely you might die. So they make sure both parents are supportive of it. And so it's one of the very few things that you need to have both your parents sign when you're under 18. But they do that for a reason, right? So when I brought this form to my mom, hey, I need you to sign this. My dad signed it, no problem, right? He was like, good, right? He was like, I was going to sign you up before you turned 18. My dad was all about it. My mom was like, no, I'm not signing this. There's nothing you can say. There's nothing you can do. There's no way I'm signing my son's life away, right? And I was like, what? Like I was like, man, Mom, you're stopping me from living my dream, right? And so as she was like, nope, I'm not going to do it. I got to protect my son, right? And so as she did that, I kind of told her, I was like, if you make me, I was like, once I turn 18, the first hour that I'm 18, I'm going to go sign this form and I'm gone, right? It's like, you can't stop what I'm going to do. I was like, but two, I was like, if you make me wait 5 months till I'm 18, all the jobs are going to be filled up, right? Because when the summer hits, they open up everything. You can choose whatever you want that you qualify for. And so I was like, if you make me wait 5 months, all the jobs that will be left are probably the most dangerous jobs that nobody wants to do. And so I told her, I was like, if you think you're going to protect me by making me wait, you once again are not going to, you're actually putting me in more harm's way. Right, so my mom obviously got mad. She's like, I can't defeat this guy's logic, right? I can't, there's nothing around what he just said, right? And so obviously she signed the form, I joined. But for the first couple of years, my whole career, every time I wanted to do something, right? Jump out of planes, go to war, my mom always was like, don't do it, don't, right? Like always constantly against it. And I get it. Like I said, I appreciate them. I understand why my mom did it, but that's what God had for me in my life. Does that make sense? That's what God called me to. Even though it was dangerous, even though it was risky, that's what God knew I needed. My father understood that. He knew I needed it. And I knew I needed it, right? There was a lot of things I needed to work out. But my mom still would never be convinced, like, this is what he needs to do. Even though, because she knew the danger of it, right? She wanted to protect me. And so even as I think about it, I was like, if I never joined the Army, I'd either be dead, I'd be in jail for life, or I'd be on the run and be on the FBI's most wanted list. Right? Like I said, I'm a very extreme dude. The Army actually calmed me down and made me less violent. That's what's actually kind of funny. Like most people don't think that, but it's like, if you understand, even that's why I told you the story. I was raised around guns, all this stuff as a kid. Like violence was my bread and butter. The army taught me like, you're supposed to have honor and not just go crazy, right? So it's kind of funny, but that's why I knew God knew that, and that's why he put me there, right? So only after my first tour in Iraq, I came back, I was telling all these crazy stories, I was having fun. I was like, man, that's the time of my life. That's when my mom finally kind of started shifting, right? Because she's like, I don't know why you enjoy all this stuff, but at least you're happy, right? So she kind of started making more peace with it. But for the first 3.5 years, she was so against it, always trying to talk me out of things. And so this is where I was kind of like, if I did not have God's direct communication that this is what I was supposed to do, she could have talked me out of doing a lot of that stuff. Does that make sense? Because if my mom's on the fence, or, she could be the reason why she's like, you shouldn't do it. Okay, I'm going to listen to you. Does that make sense? But I knew what God said to do. I knew what he made me to do, and I was resolute in always doing that. And I'm thankful for God for that. Does that make sense? But that's where it was kind of like, it was a struggle with knowing my mom always struggled with it. Does that make sense? If you understand, like, you never want to have that in your mind when you're away and doing some stuff, right? And so that's why I said, like, my mom did not understand that her love needed to go underneath God's will. Does that make sense? That's where we understand, like, mother's love is so powerful, it's so important, but it needs to be under God's love. Because in the same time, if you're worried about your kids doing risky things or dangerous things or things that are unknown or, things that have never been done before, right? If you're trying to protect them, the best place for them to be is wherever God says they need to be. The best thing for them to do is exactly what God says to do. And so even if you're loved or if you're scared, your way of, or the way you want to protect them, the way you want to look out for them will not be better, and it will not protect them if it's not what God said to do. Does that make sense? And that's where we said, like, we have to understand that sacrificial love, that compassionate love must always be under God, right? And so that's where, like, for me and my mom, obviously, it was a little bit tough in the beginning, but the more, obviously God showed me more about my mom and what she went through, and I understand that love, but I also understood, kind of showed her back. Like, I was able to do all these things because I had my faith in God. He's the one that showed me, right? He's the one that protected me ultimately. Because part of my mom, the reason why she was scared for me to join, obviously, number one, right, the military is the dangerous thing. My dad went through it. She knew what he went through. But also, she saw my dad's side effects when he came back. That's one thing I never knew as a kid. My dad never showed us that, right? That's why I said his level of parenting is very different. But he never showed me those type of things. I didn't know what he went through. And so now I understand why my mom was so nervous, right? Now, it wasn't just if I would survive, but it was kind of like, what would I be like when I came back? Does that make sense? So even as I understood, and my dad shared a lot more in these last couple of years, now it makes a lot more sense of why my mom was so protective. Does that make sense? So it's not a barrier between us. I definitely appreciate why she felt, why she was always praying, why she always looked to God to protect me. Does that make sense? Because that's what I said. It was a good thing for her faith as well. She needed to trust God to guide me. Does that make sense? She needed to let go. God gave her me to develop her faith, right? It's not everything on her. And so obviously it was a good thing, but that's where I kept saying, like, I understand why she wanted to be worried about me, but that's where I showed her. But all that worry did nothing. In reality, it all just was on God. Does that make sense? And so hopefully for every one of us, right? It's obviously for mothers, they have a great impact, but for every one of us, we have to grow in this. This is something that we all need to understand. Like, that we have to develop our faith in a way to make sure we're being strengthened, and that we're also able to strengthen the people that God puts in our lives. Right? So that's why I said the mother's work is never done. And so we can look, there's a bunch of Proverbs. You can look at them later as well. That's part of the applications to really read them, understand. But there's the Proverbs 6:20-22. It says, "My son, keep your father's commandment and forsake not your mother's teaching. Bind them on your heart always. Tie them around your neck. When you walk, they will lead you. When you lie down, they will watch over you. And when you awake, they will talk with you." Right? So this is where this is an encouragement to parents to say, like, if you really want your kids to walk with the Lord, or really be protected, really keep teaching them, right? Really keep doing all these things. And it's never done. I talk to my mom and my dad about this all the time, but like, they're still raising us, right? They're still teaching us as kids how to get over things, how to forgive, how to, deal with sibling things, all kinds of stuff, right? How to keep growing in our faith, how to keep, changing even after so many years. I kind of laugh because if you notice here, it says, your father commands you and your mother teaches you. You guys notice the difference, right? Would you agree with that? Or is your mom more commanding? Or you can't answer right now if your mom's here. All right. That means they're more commanding secretly. All right. I get, that's true. That's very true. But that's what I said. Like, everyone has their way of doing it. But it's kind of a joke where some people question whether women can preach or men should preach. I've seen a lot of arguments in school. Every time they have the arguments, I always goof around and ask them these questions. Like, why do you think God made men preachers and why do you think he made women teachers? And they're like, what? And so I tell them, I was like, men are great at telling people what to do, right? It's like, even in the Proverbs, it tells them they're all about commanding. That's what preaching is. You're basically telling people what to do, right? Teaching is a whole other animal. Teaching is where you're actually listening. You're trying to see how they process it and you're trying to make applications for where they're at. Does that make sense? So that's what they're saying. Like, men are better at telling, women better at listening and actually. And so that's not the truth, right? Everybody has different personalities, but it's always kind of this understanding where it's like teaching is what parents are supposed to do. Obviously, both have that role, but it's important to understand that what mothers teach and how they show how to teach is what the church needs. Most of you guys don't study church history, right? Or everybody knows church history pretty well. All right. So if you ever study church history, you'll actually see women have a very big role in church expansion. So one of the major ones for Hispanic churches, right? Most Hispanics, they started off as Catholic, but you see a very big movement in Baptists and different groups. We were conquered. There's a reason why we're Catholic, because of Spain, they brought that over. But when you see the actual Christians that come out from being taught, you have to understand how that came about. How did they break the Catholic background, right? That's how I'm here, right? So as I studied it, one of the major organizations is called the Southern Baptist Convention, right? That's the one I'm a part of. That's what I went to school for. And so when they first were expanding into the West, right, and hitting all the Hispanic cultures and nations, a lot of people were like, "Oh, this is a great mission field. We should all go there. We should be able to do all these things, right? Like, there's so many people that haven't heard the gospel." And so the main leaders, they were a bunch of men, right? They were like, "No, it's not worth it. Like, they're not, they're not going to get it, or they're going to be resilient, or they're so ingrained in Catholic culture they will never change." So a bunch of women were like, Sunday school teachers are like, "Nah, that's not good enough, right? Like, God says to go there, we'll go on our own, right?" So they went unfunded. They went to all these regions, and they just kept going further and further and further. And so these women were basically help raising all these churches, right? They created all these churches in this Hispanic culture, like all these little spots, and also in the countries, right? They started expanding all the way down to Central and South America and Mexico. And so once they saw all the success, they saw all these churches, then the Southern Baptist Convention showed up, and they're like, "Hey, this is good. Like, we're gonna now we're gonna bless this and now fund it," right? But then all the men took over, and so it was kind of funny where they were like, you realize that the men were unwilling to go and teach, right? They're not, and so there was always these women that went and said, "Hey, God made this call. We're gonna go sacrifice. We're gonna go on our own." Does that make sense? With no funding, with no money, with no support, because this is what we know God wants us to do, and this is what is needed to be done. Does that make sense? So it's kind of the Hispanic culture is very male dominant, if you know that. But that's where it was always funny. Like, it was because that's what they said. Like, how can women go change all these men? Because they don't actually listen to women. If you understand this, I've taught a lot of Hispanic leaders. They do not listen to women. That they're very strict on that. But that's where it was kind of funny. Like, you saw, we have the church history, the church numbers, the church data, where it was like they were the ones that actually expanded the whole church. And that's where we see, like, it was a movement of God, and then it was like, well, how did they do that? How did they break down a culture that's not willing to listen to them? And it was like, because they shared Christ-like love. Does that make sense? They followed that example of like, we're here, we're sacrificing, we're here on our own budget, away from our families for you. Does that make sense? We think you're important. And so as they did that, obviously they broke down so many barriers. And so that's why I said, hopefully as you guys understand, the work is never done, right? The work is always there. And so hopefully you keep spending time, whatever role you have, developing and preparing how to teach the next generation. All right, because our youth group, in 2 weeks, we're going to have a women and men's panel, right? They're going to be able to talk and share with them. And so I'm very appreciative of all the women that are doing it. This is the second year that they've done it, right? But that's what we're trying to continue that trend. Like, you're supposed to keep pouring into the next group, right? Most of the people are going to be like big sisters, right? They're not that much older than them. The guys, same thing, right? They're going to be big brothers. But even for the women here, right? All the people, the fathers, grandfathers, there's still more to teach the next generation. That makes sense. There's still more to pour in. There's still more to fill those roles. And so hopefully you kind of see like, hey, that's my responsibility. If the work's never done, so I got to keep getting ready. I got to keep seeking God to develop, to be able to fill these family roles that are always needed. Does that make sense? Because for the most part, there's a lot of reasons why people come to this church family. They don't have a family. And so hopefully you guys start understanding what God really has for us and why he keeps saying you're supposed to be these roles. Does that make sense? It doesn't replace our existing ones. It just adds to it, right? And so hopefully you understand what you're called to do. So as you're doing these applications, right, spend some time in prayer, thanking God for all those he has placed in your life to share motherly love, right? It doesn't just have to be your mother. Think about all the people that God has put in your life to share this kind of love with you. Reflect on how you can honor your mother and keep her teachings always in your heart. This is where that Proverbs was there, where it was kind of like, you do not forsake your mother's teaching. There's another one, right? Proverbs 22:6, train up a child in the way he should go. Even when he is old, he will not depart from it. This is what we see, like the parents' love, you never forget it, right? Most people, you can kind of know who my mom is based upon who I am, right? You'll understand if you ever really guys get to meet in the future, maybe. You're like, yes, he actually does follow pretty much a lot of what his mom does. Does that make sense? And so that's how it's supposed to work. And so hopefully you guys understand to look back and say, hey, how can I honor my mother? How can I keep living to honor her memory and how she shared love, all the things that she tried to implant in my life? Does that make sense? My dad he's a guy that's like, I'm gonna go kill people to make sure that they don't hurt nobody. My mom is like, I'm gonna protect you. That's why I had that story, right? My mom is the one that wants to protect people. And so that's where I said, like, that level of protection was shifted, because I was more into my dad's mindset in the Army. That was not a mindset I could carry over to ministry, right? Like, that wasn't gonna be what I was supposed to do. And so that's where I understood. I was like, now I get why my mom, why I have both parents, right? They each taught me one thing. My dad taught me to get me through my first phase of life. My mom's teaching is actually what's for the rest of my life. Does that make sense? And so that's why I said, like, everything that she taught me, everything that I saw as a kid that I didn't understand, now I go back to her. Now I talk to her. How do I do this with the kids? How do I listen? Or how do I, because that's where, like, a lot of the women in my life, I was celebrating Mother's Day with a lot of the mothers that have been there for me yesterday. And that was that same thing, right? Like, all the things they taught me, every time I've dealt with kids, that's what I said. that is the worst thing God could have put me in some ways. But he's used it to shape me and change me. And so when I didn't know how to do things with youth and kids, I would always go to them. Does that make sense? They've always been there to shape me and remind me of, and then it kind of like always clicked what they did for me in the past. And that's why I said, like, I'm able to do what I do because of all the women that they showed me, what they taught me, right? And really what they exemplified for me. And so I always try to honor them with my actions and think in many ways of what I can do. And so whoever God gave you, whoever he's put in your life, remember them, reflect on it, and keep it always on your heart. It will guide you through everything that you go through. And then pray to God for the opportunity to share that motherly love with all those in the body of Christ and for those who are not part of the family yet. Right? That's what we said. It's one thing. It's great to have a mother that loved you or did all these things for you. But that's not where God's intention wasn't for you just to have it and say, hey, great, hold on to it. He gave you those examples to then share it with somebody else. Right? Be able to do it, be able to be there for them, be able to step up, right? Because like I said, there's so many in need, so many people in different situations. I remember one year, a couple years, when I first started, one of the youth in 7th grade, right? She came 2 weeks to the youth group, and she was there Friday night partying up. Her mom was having a blast. That Saturday night, her mom died, right? So as she was lost, it was a single parent, right? So the community came together. Right? She stayed with one of the families for a little bit. The mom was willing to take care of her, keep her connected. They found her long lost aunt. She was able to come and take care of her, right? But there was like this huge period where the girl did not have anybody. But that's where we saw the body of believers come together. And so that's what we said, like, the reason why God gave us his love is to share it with somebody that needs it. And so hopefully you guys keep trying to find those opportunities. God was very big in adopting orphans, right? Taking care of them. My friend, a good friend of mine, he started a thing called Foster the Bay. It's a Christian organization that works with like over 100 churches in the Bay Area. They help foster kids while they're in and out of homes. Does that make sense? They don't have nobody to take care of them, or they're working cases out with their parents. They got to be away. And they, as Christians, see the call to, like, we're supposed to take care of them. Does that make sense? So that's why I said, even if you don't have kids, God created that opportunity. Like, you're supposed to you now have the opportunity to take care of somebody else. Does that make sense? This is where the body is supposed to really keep pouring that love. And so we should really be praying for the opportunities and what God wants us to do. Kind of like that lady that I shared, right? She found a way. Her calling was to do it in schools. That makes sense. Everybody has a different purpose, but we know that all that purpose is for us. And so read the Proverbs next week, right? Take some time to use them in your devotional, right? Evaluate if you are teaching the next generation the right and godly things. Dedicate yourself to improve no matter where you're at. The Proverbs cover everything, mothers, fathers, right? All the time, how to be a child. And that's why I said these are the instructions that was like, this is how you're supposed to live, and then teach the next generation. That makes sense. That's why these Proverbs, they're actually Solomon. Most of them are Solomon's. A lot of them, we believe, came from David teaching him as a kid. that make sense? We're actually going to do Psalm 119 in a couple weeks. It's David basically teaching Solomon the ABCs of God. That makes sense? This is how they raised them up. And so for all of us, we know we're supposed to raise them up in these ways. We need to keep being dedicated, knowing that what we do, what we learn, is what we're going to pass on to the next generation. All right? So mothers, I thank you again. I hope you really get to enjoy your celebrations, but you have more work to do, right? Mother's work is never, and I know all of them, all the moms here were like, we need to call Joaquin's mom and tell her her work is not done either. Like, she got a lot to do, right? And she knows that. That's all right. All right, but like I said, take the time to really thank God, right, for what you've been able to see, and really ask, how can I share that love then with others? Does that make sense? God gave it to me. God was using our mothers to show us his kind of love. How can we keep sharing that love with all those that need it?